I'm losing weight. I was 230, now I'm 196.
Nice.
Eating cucumbers, healthy way.
Gotta love cucumbers.
They're great.
Nice.
And you eat a little fish, drink a lot of water.
There you go.
Say hello to your wife for me, please. Miss everybody. Thank you.
Let's give it one more minute and then we'll get started. While we're waiting, I will just put the source sheet in the chat. So if you want to download it or keep it for later, since I realize that most of the time when I lead Torah study, we don't get through all of it. So hold on, let me just get this to everyone and then we'll get started. Okay. Hi, everyone. Let's begin first with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, before we get into the Torah portion, I just wanted to take a minute just to reflect and allow us to just have a moment to reflect on what's happening in Ukraine, since it's pretty scary and terrible. And I don't know if people are aware that there are at least 43,000 Jews who live in Ukraine, probably more than that, but according to a 2020 Pew study of European Jews, there are at least 43,000. And the president, Zelensky, he's also Jewish. And so and of course, our tradition has a long history connected to that area and that region. So probably many of you, including myself, have ancestors from that area of the world. And I'll open it up in a minute, but if anyone else wants to just share, again, I don't want to get into our own political interpretations of what could happen. Like, I'm not an expert in that. I don't want to take up too much time, but I will just say, it's, I think, not only disturbing to see what's happening, but also some of the language that Putin has used, which is being how he wants to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, and references to Nazism as his reasoning for going into Ukraine, and that the Ukrainians are committing genocide. And really interesting that here we have this really scary leader who is using Nazism as his excuse for going in to another country. And to me, that's very scary, that language has been brought into the discussion and the reasoning behind Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. But I just wanted to give the space for a minute if anyone had any reflections, or, since many of us are still kind of locked in our own worlds and we're not out and about, and I'm sure also have been watching the news, just wanted to give the space if anyone wanted to share just any emotional responses or anything that this has brought up for them about what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, if I may, I find it rather terrifying, because it feels like it's a change in the world order as we know it, as we've always known, as I've always known since I was born. And it's scary because I can't see where this is going to go.
Yeah, Miriam, go ahead.
Yes. Also, I'm interested in the status. I didn't know so many people, so many Jews lived in Ukraine. We surely don't have a lovely history in connection with Ukraine, how anti-Semitic they always were. I understand even before Hitler. And then they were So my question is this: what is their status presently? What is their personal feeling presently? And do they choose to live in Ukraine because their life is very worthwhile there? I mean, they have the opportunity and had the opportunity to leave, if it came to that, apparently they did not. So I'm interested in what keeps them there. Are there Jewish schools? Are they brought up Jewishly? Those kinds of questions.
Good questions. Yeah, Risa, did you want to respond to that or share other things?
Well, the Times of Israel reports that there are 100,000 Jews in Ukraine today, and many of them are in the community where Rabbi Nachman has been buried, and they're there because they come from Israel before Rosh Hashanah, and then they decide to live there, and they make a huge living there on the thousands of Hasidim who come not only before Rosh Hashanah, but all through the year. They run hotels, they run restaurants, they run schools, etc. So in that community where he is buried, that's where the big crux of about 40,000 Jews, Hasidim, are. And then there are others in other communities throughout Ukraine. But that's the big reason that the Israelis are there. And the other thing that they stated is that, not counting the Jews who left immediately and went back to Israel, but there are 78 Jews who made Aliyah on Sunday from the Ukraine, just before the fighting broke out.
And just, I want to build on that. This is from the forward. This just kind of lists some of the cities in Ukraine where there are Jewish communities. Kiev, which has, it says, home to about 110,000 Jews and half a dozen synagogues, and kosher restaurants. In this other town, Dnipro, Eastern City, a synagogue, a mikveh, a building that's shaped like a menorah. In Kharkiv, there are 45,000 Jews who call it home. Southern Port City has 45,000 Jews. In Odessa, in a Jewish museum. So there, again, the Uman, which Risa was just referencing, right? The home, the burial plot of Nachman of Breslov, which attracts tens of thousands of Jews annually in the pilgrimage, and then Lviv, which has a small Jewish community. So there are these areas throughout Ukraine that have these Jewish communities embedded in them. Ben, and then Warren and/or Phyllis.
Thank you, Rabbi. Nice to see you. Good Shabbos. And again, if there's something that we can do from here in our little bubble here in Los Angeles for these people, let us know, please.
I will. I think actually I did get a list of some resources here, and I haven't checked all of these, but I will put them in the chat so people can go and check those out too. Again, you can check them out on your own. Warren and Phyllis.
I wanted to add that the prime minister is also Jewish, besides the president, which is pretty incredible. The other thing is that I've been getting emails from HIAS, JDC, and somebody else. And they're all raising money for a variety of things to support people there. So there's plenty of information about how to help.
Yes. And I'll put, speaking of HIAS, they have a special page that I'm also going to put in the chat there about refugees, and they're going to keep updating that as well.
The Jewish Agency, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Risa.
Just the Jewish Agency is meeting in Israel right now. They just came from Dubai and they're in Israel, and they're announcing that a lot of their discussions are going to be about what's happening in Ukraine and how they're going to distribute money for that. So look at the Jewish Agency site too.
Thank you, Risa. Brad?
Sorry about that. I was just wondering if the temple was doing any outreach to members who are of Ukrainian descent. I have a friend who's a temple member. I spoke with her yesterday. She's very concerned about family members over there And I'm wondering what kind of outreach there is from our temple to its own membership.
That's a good question. And only if we know specifically of someone who has either family, and there are a few people that we know of. And Brad, please send me, you can even direct message me in the chat to send me that person's name so we can be in touch with them. So we're reaching out to people individually when we can. But again, it's a little tough because we don't necessarily know everyone's family makeup and either where they're from or where they have family. So but please send me anyone, please feel free to send me names so we can reach out to people. Okay, any other thoughts, reflections?
Where do we look for if we wanted to raise money? Where will we send it to?
I put some options in the chat already.
Okay.
And I know also the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles is trying to organize opportunities to support either financially or in other ways, support the Jewish community in Ukraine as well. So, yes. Okay, with that, let's transition into this week's Torah portion. Some years, this week's Torah portion, Vayakhel, and next week's Pikudei are read in the same Shabbat, and other times, like this year, they are separated out because, for example, this year we have 2 Adars, the month of Adar, where Purim takes place in the month of Adar, and we have an Adar 1 and an Adar 2. So on those times we split up those Torah portions. So this one's a short Torah portion, and it's almost as though it's a retelling of what has already been discussed earlier on in the book of Exodus about the building of the tabernacle, because we're really getting to the end of the narrative, and we're going to have a break between now at the end of Exodus until we get back to the book of Numbers. The book of Leviticus does not read like a narrative. So Genesis and Exodus tell stories, and we really can kind of get a sense of those stories as we're reading along. But what happens as soon as we get to Leviticus, that stops, and then Numbers picks up with the narrative again as the Jews wander through the rest of the desert. And Numbers has some great stories in it as well. So we are going to look at a couple of themes that stand out from this week's Torah portion. And let me share my screen so we can get it up there for all of you. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see this. And I ask if everyone could just, I feel like someone's unmuted and can't tell who it is, but if everyone could stay muted, that would be great. Okay. On 6 days, work may be done, but on the 7th day, you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. Holy to you, Adonai, whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. Okay, so clearly, based on this, a very strong statement about the importance of Shabbat, right? So important to the point where if you break Shabbat, you are going to be put to death. Not every instance of the commandment to keep Shabbat comes with that attached to it. So they're really doubling down, and God is doubling down on the importance of Shabbat. And this comes right before we are going to be, again, referring to all the details of the tabernacle. So first, this quote from Heschel about Shabbat comes from, of course, the wonderful book, The Sabbath. So hopefully all of you have either read it or have a chance to go out and read it. It's an excellent and really incredible and beautiful ode to Shabbat. So as he says, when history began, there was only one holiness in the world, holiness in time. When at Sinai, the word of God was about to be voiced, a call for holiness in man was proclaimed. Thou shalt be unto me a holy people. It was only after the people had succumbed to the temptation of worshiping a thing, a golden calf, that the erection of a tabernacle of holiness in was commanded. The sanctity of time came first, the sanctity of man came second, and the sanctity of space last. Time was hallowed by God. Space, the tabernacle, was consecrated by Moses. Okay, someone want to review and summarize what was it that was just what was Heschel saying? So this is an interesting way of understanding this idea of Shabbat and this transition of holiness, right? Because he's talking about holiness, and Shabbat is supposed to be this holy time. I'll put it up one more time so you can see it. What he's suggesting here is that there are three types of holiness that came into the world. The first was this idea of Shabbat with holy in time, right? And that is the most important piece of holiness that can exist. And therefore, it's the sanctity of time through Shabbat. Then only later do we sanctify the holiness of humanity. And then after that, finally, sanctity of space. The tabernacle, which we have been talking about in the last couple of weeks and this week, is really that last piece of sanctity where we understand the power of space, and that we as people like to find ways of bringing holiness into the physical world around us, unlike time, which is not physical. So that, again, the reminder of Shabbat being the pinnacle of holiness. Then we have Nahama Leibowitz, who says holiness was applied to a place solely at the instance of the people of Israel, whereas the holiness of time was pronounced by God at the very beginning of things. Okay, holiness was applied to a place only because Israel needed it. In other words, this is suggesting that the only reason that we created the tabernacle and had a physical space to connect to God was really because we needed it. Right? Any time we see in the Torah, according to this midrashic interpretation, anytime we see in the Torah that it's talking about God commanded the Jews to build the tabernacle, all of the details of that, it's not because God needs that place, according to this midrash that she's referring to. Instead, it's because we as humans need to somehow ground in the physical world a way of connecting to God. That God doesn't need any of that. But that, again, what is happening in the Torah, and especially in the book of Exodus, is God is trying to create ways in which we can connect to God in a way that we can understand in our minds, because we need, again, this goes back to this same concept of anthropomorphizing of God, right? God's hands, God's voice, right? All the things and images that are found throughout the Torah that connect us to God through kind of these physical attributes, which of course leads to many challenges. For example, when one of the preschoolers would say that, God is a man up in heaven with a beard, right? And that's the stereotypical version of God. And that really comes from the challenge that we have of wanting to find a way of physically connecting with God. Okay, so Shabbat comes as a reminder at the beginning of this Torah portion, and the rabbis are trying to figure out, okay, why is this being retold? This is not the first time that we get the commandment for Shabbat. Why is it coming right before the details of the tabernacle? And they say, well, actually, it's because now what we're going to do is we're going to be told this is the catalyst for us to understand what are the limitations of work on Shabbat, which of course is not laid out in the Torah, right? The Torah doesn't go into the details of the types of work that we're not supposed to do. It's in the Mishnah that comes a little later, where we get 39 categories of work associated with the building of the tabernacle. And those are the categories of work that we are not supposed to do on Shabbat. So when it comes to all the things that you see more traditional Jews not doing, it has to do with the fact that they all fall under these 39 categories. So before we get into that, Donna, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I was going to say the holiness, the space, God doesn't need it, but we do, and we're a community. And also, we're our tabernacles, our bodies are holy unto the Lord, and in the community, and that our homes are a sacred place where we have Shabbat, we light the candles, and we invite the Sabbath bride in. So I think it all correlates together with the commandments to be closer to God and to communicate with God and have God dwell within us and among us as a people.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Let's see what those 39 categories are. This comes from Mishnah Shabbat. This fundamental Mishnah enumerates those who perform the primary categories of labor prohibited on Shabbat, which number 40 less 1, therefore 39. They are grouped in accordance with their function: one who sows and one who plows, and one who reaps and one who gathers, sheaves in a pile, and one who threshes, removing the kernel from the husk, and one who winnows, threshed grain on the wind, and one who selects the inedible waste from the edible, and one who grinds, and one who sifts the flour in the sieve, and one who kneads dough, and one who bakes. Additionally, primary categories of prohibited labor are the following: one who shears wool, one who whitens it, one who combs the fleece and straightens it, one who dyes it, and one who spins the wool, and one who stretches the threads of the warp in the loom, and one who constructs two meshes, tying the threads of the warp to the base of the loom, and one who weaves two threads, and one who severs two threads for constructive purposes, and one who ties a knot, and one who unties a knot, and one who sews two stitches with a needle, as well as one who tears a fabric in order to sew two stitches, one who traps a deer or any living creature, and one who slaughters it, and one who flays it, and one who salts its hide, a step in the tanning process, and one who tans its hide, and one who smooths it, removing hairs and veins, and one who cuts it with measured parts, one who writes two letters and one who erases in order to write two letters, one who builds a structure and one who dismantles it, one who extinguishes a fire and one who kindles a fire, one who strikes a blow with a hammer to complete the production process of a vessel, and one who carries out an object from domain to domain. All these are primary categories of labor, and they number 40 less 1. Okay, so anything that from these 39 categories, you can see it pretty specific in some of them, the rabbis then go and expand all the laws of Shabbat. And since the Mishnah is really the primary place where that is done, and then it gets expanded on in the Talmud and then later law codes as well. But any questions about any of this related to Shabbat or the categories of work? Any reflections on anyone? I don't know, let's take it even broader than that potentially. Anyone over the last few years, since we haven't been able to necessarily gather together in a way that traditionally Jews do gather for Shabbat, any insights you've gained or any new ways in which you have developed a connection to Shabbat that didn't exist before?
Saving, saving lives because of the pandemic is where you can not completely keep Shabbat if you have to save a life, like a doctor. You have to go out and work at the hospital or something to save a life. These are laws that you have a grace period because of saving a life. Doesn't it say, Rabbi, that you can, whatever you have to do to save a life, null and void the law? That's what I just want to say.
Yep. Thank you. Murrow.
I'm grateful that we have technology and that I understand technology enough that it's provided me, one, from Wilshire and also from our congregation here and other congregations where I have friends and family that are rabbis, that I can at least connect the community somehow, and that my family, we're all over the country, and some are more locked up than others, but I'm just grateful that we can all, I mean, we've had Zoom Shabbats, Zoom Seders, Zoom Shiva minions for several relatives, and I'm grateful that we have that. Otherwise, I don't know, yeah, you can't just connect with a phone call. You kind of have to see each other.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
I guess what this pandemic has done to me is I appreciate being home more, but I also, because I realize I don't have to be out as much as I was, that I can work from home, but that we can all communicate. I mean, we FaceTime with the kids who live 6 minutes from us constantly, because part of it is their schedule, but the other part of it is during the worst part of the pandemic, it was the only way we could all communicate at any hour of the day.
Thanks, Merle. Merlot, then Brad, and then Risa.
Well, I think it's definitely difficult because we don't have like that face-to-face interaction. So I think because like I'm part of like that younger generation, I was able to connect a lot through social media. And it was kind of interesting because there wasn't a lot of like, I guess, teen people very much involved with the Jewish community at like the beginning of the pandemic. So I was able to kind of like take that step and create a way for people to be more involved, because obviously it's harder when it's on Zoom. And like, I don't know if you guys all relate to this, but if you have a Zoom meeting, it's not like it's harder to say like, hi, how are you, than like when you're in person. So being able to kind of break that barrier and maybe even like connect with people through writing or creating different ways to talk to people, not only just doing Torah portions, it really helps you connect and grow and flourish throughout your life.
Nice. And you said you were able, towards the beginning of the pandemic, to kind of connect with others through social media around Shabbat. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah,
how did you do that?
Well, I reached out to different people, but in the last few months, I created a thing called Jewteen, and we kind of like decode Torah portions and create ways to kind of talk about things that aren't really talked about throughout the Jewish community and kind of highlight those matters. So, yeah.
Can you give us an example of one of those issues?
One of the issues, well, honestly, we're even working on the Ukraine idea right now, because that's something where the Jewish people are kind of trapped in a way, and it's harder for them to get out or to recover from that. So to be able to also create that connection while they're in such a difficult place, it's important to create that.
And if you're willing, if you maybe put in the chat for everyone about Jewteen or whatever the title was that you said, if there's information or ways that people can connect to what you're working on, that would be very cool.
Thank you. Okay. It's just starting to start. So once everything comes out, I will send out more information.
Awesome. Thanks, Merlot. Brad, and then Risa, and then Miriam.
Well, first of all, bravo, Merlot. Congratulations to you. That's terrific. Rabbi, I wanted to go back for a second to this concept of time and the saying that Jews build cathedrals in time as opposed to cathedrals in space. So when we use the word time in a Jewish concept, I just want to be sure I'm understanding what we mean. Because, for example, the ancient Greeks, they had 3 different words for time. They had chronos, they had kairos, they had aeon, they had chronological time, they had eschatological time, and they had time that was focused on the particular moment. So when we talk about Jews building cathedrals in time, what do we mean by time exactly? Is there more than one definition, more than one word for time in Hebrew? Is
Great question. In terms of the Hebrew, I'd leave it to Penina if she to answer that part. But Penina, you're muted. So hold on one second, Penina. But when we are referring to time, at least the way that I think about this idea of a palace in time is not just linear hourly time, but what we are trying to create is almost a different framework by which we are existing, that it's not necessarily the time in a linear sense, but that Shabbat is supposed to almost transcend that linear concept of time. And
not only
I'll keep thinking. Yeah, go ahead, Penina.
Okay, there is a famous, we sing Bayamim Hahem Bazman Hazeh, in those days at this season. In other words, what we are going to...
We sing it on Hanukkah.
Right. And also I think on Purim. So we are trying to, and the saying is that something that you learn from that particular time or incident that happened, that you can apply it to this day. Bayamim Hahem, what happened then, Bazman Hazeh, history repeats itself. We have situations that are very similar to what happened then. That's why the Torah was written, because there is a lot of situations that you can relate to it and see that what happened there actually repeats itself in different times. So it's just a matter of being connected and not forgetting, because like I said, history repeats itself. And now you see again, there we go. And by the way, I wanted to tell you that Russia gave a lot of refuge to Jews during the Holocaust, People flew from Europe to Russia and left Poland to Russia. I had lots of friends that found actually were saved because of it, and also joined the army in Russia. And
Thank you.
Not just being citizens there in Russia. So Russia gave refuge to a lot of Jews. The Ukraine were horrible even before the war. There were pogroms there. They were the worst. So now I don't know how to react to it because we got there. You told me a prime minister that's Jewish and this that's Jewish. I really don't know how history will unfold itself, but hopefully it won't be a repeat of what they were doing all their lives before, even and after the war. That's all.
Okay.
And
Thank you,
Israel
Tina.
is telling them to come. They are encouraging to come. They should come to Israel. They open their doors and probably they are going to be also ready to support them and put them in places and stuff like that, just like they did with the Ethiopian, just like they did with the Yemenites. We don't leave any people behind if they want to leave. That's it.
Thank you. And just one more thing, Brad, along the lines of time. I participated in a Beit Din earlier this week, someone who was converting to Judaism with actually Risa's husband was on that Beit Din with me. And one of the things that we talk about when someone converts is that they stood at Mount Sinai with everyone else, that people even today who are becoming Jews were also there. So there's a time warp that also exists. I wouldn't know how to categorize it per se in the way, and I'm sure you can, Brad, but there is this way across time in which Jews are connecting, in the way in which we are supposed to even understand Revelation. Some would say Revelation happened at Mount Sinai and it happened once, but others would say it's a process and that it's constantly happening, right? So there are these elements of time that are not necessarily linear, in which kind of time folds on itself, where the past and the present can somehow be melded together. And usually when it comes to a conversion, that's one of the things that comes to mind. Okay, I think it was Risa, and then Miriam, and then Sydney. You're muted, Risa.
I just had one little thing to say. As I was looking at the text as we started this, verse 4 says, Moses said further to the whole community. And the thought that went through my mind is, we now have trouble being a whole community. So it just struck me as
they had trouble then. Risa, they had trouble then with Korah and rebellious people also. And so I think it's in the Jewish nature to have trouble with itself forever. And Cain Yerbu, may this go on for millennia. I think it's in our nature.
Risa, were you done, or did you want to add anything else in? Okay. Miriam.
I didn't want Merlot to leave without a major Kol HaKavod to you, dear. You look like you're 15. I don't know your age. I tell my age to everybody, especially people don't want to know my age, and I tell it to them. But all I can say is that you are a young mitzvah lady, and not only are you involved, but you're so evolved, and you cause others to be involved also. And we just can't praise you enough, Merlot.
Thank you, Miriam. Sydney, aka Mom.
Yeah. So Joel, Rabbi, thank you for starting out this learning session and Torah study with what's going on in Ukraine, but it just takes us to a contemporary sensibility about time. And I was thinking about this and about Brad's comments and notations about how do we define time, and thinking about the fact that the International Space Station is now at risk because the Russians are responsible for a certain part of it. The Americans are responsible for another part. And unless they can continue to cooperate, there's a risk of it falling and crashing into Europe or some other place. So the idea that we have something up in space that's crossing time zones, that crosses borders, and that can actually come crashing down makes me think about what does it mean to be in time in collaboration, and what happens during the time in Shabbat or any other time when that falls apart. So in terms of community and Judaism and the Jewish people, we've had to form communities wherever we land. And that crosses a lot of the space-time continuum. So just a note based on the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's keep going. And again, we are definitely not going to get through everything, as is usually the case. Okay, which is fine by me. 35:5, which Risa referenced before. Take from among you, I think you referenced this, take from among you gifts to Adonai. Everyone whose heart is so moved shall bring them. Gifts for Adonai, gold, silver, copper, etc. It goes on and on. I wanted to highlight this because the idea of everyone whose heart is so moved, and the importance here of the difference between the types of ways in which we can give to others. There's giving out of obligation, and there's giving potentially out of your heart being moved to do so. And to me, this is another reminder of this idea of intentionality in our tradition, that this is not just blind giving for giving's sake, or necessarily even because of being commanded to do so, but instead, what does it mean to do something when your heart is moved to do it? How can we be giving gifts, not necessarily even physical gifts, right? What does it mean to give the gifts of who we are and our skills from our heart, as opposed to just going through the motions per se? So here, the tabernacle, we are reminded, is built on gifts of those whose hearts were so moved to give those gifts. And that's just an extra layer besides the beauty, the physical beauty of the tabernacle itself. We have this idea that built into that beautiful structure is an intentionality by which those gifts were given to create that structure. And that we're supposed to, again, now it's not necessarily time, but it's this idea of the physical and that which is not physical and tangible connected together. And the tabernacle and the place where God dwells is a place where we can somehow blend together that which is the most intentional from deep within us and the pieces of the world that can also give us structure and hope. Phyllis and or Warren.
I'm really puzzled by how we get from the calf to giving from our hearts. And I even read over this morning from the calf on to see if I could find something that would create that. And the only thing I see is fear and not love. And so I'm really puzzled.
Okay, good. And the rabbis were also curious, why do more of the details of the actual building of the tabernacle get discussed after the calf, after the golden calf? Was it built out of guilt? What was the tabernacle then built out of guilt because of the golden calf? Some would say yes. Others would say it's not connected at all to that. That we're not supposed to necessarily link the two things together. You have, and a very Jewish thing to do is to find those links. So I don't see them as connected. I don't see that the giving of the gifts was a guilt offering per se, because we do have references to guilt offerings. We find that more in Book of Leviticus coming up in a few weeks. But instead, the tabernacle is already referenced before the golden calf in some of the Torah portions that come before the golden calf. And again, we're not supposed to see everything that happens in the Torah in a linear way, in terms of that chronologically things happened in a certain order. And so already it's weird that the golden calf story comes not right after Mount Sinai and the giving of the 10 Commandments. It comes some Torah portions later. So for me, I see those gifts as separate from this idea of the guilt, because actually, if you give a gift out of guilt, I guess your heart could still be moved, but your intention again is different than the way I've always understood the tabernacle and what it's supposed to represent. It's not a place that it's supposed to be built on guilt. It's supposed to be built on opportunity and hope and optimism, and from the best of people. Now, I guess you could read that in a lot of ways, but that's just my interpretation. But I understand your frustration with it. Brad, David, and then Miriam.
The gift there seems to be described as one of detached generosity, without any return expected. And yet the philosopher Marcel Mauss, M-A-U-S-S, has written extensively about gifts, the tradition of gifting as part of a cycle, which it's a three-part cycle involving giving, accepting, and then reciprocating. And it is that three-part cycle that brings us together as a community. It solidifies our social relationships. So I'm wondering, in this concept of the gift, is there an expectation and an obligation of the party receiving the gift to somehow reciprocate?
Well, who would you say is receiving the gift in this case?
God.
Is God the one receiving this gift?
Well, I
don't know.
sure.
See, I mean, we could read it on I would say on a literal level, if we again go back to this idea that the tabernacle was built for God because God commanded it, then you could say that God is the recipient of these gifts. However, I am intrigued by this idea that really the reason that physical domains were created were for human sake, right? That God didn't need the tabernacle. We needed the tabernacle. So it's almost as though those who gave the gifts both gave and were the recipients of that gift. And when usually the cycle is you give a gift to someone else. But in this case, maybe the power behind what the tabernacle also represents is this, that people were giving a gift purely for themselves. Now, again, they may have been doing it for God, but I think if their hearts were so moved and they knew that God was going to be a part of what they were creating, the gift that they were giving was really a space for themselves, and that they were the recipients and the givers. One idea. David, and then Miriam, and then Penina.
Isn't it that the meaning of the Torah is as much as anything else is in the progression? I mean, Moses goes up to the top of Mount Sinai, disappears in the cloud, this very fearful situation. The next thing is instructions on how to build a tabernacle. It's very annoying from a sort of reader's point of view. You got to stop and get architectural instructions. And then out of that comes, when Moses is ready to come down, there's the golden calf. Then he smashes the tablets and has to reprimand the people. Then he has to go up and get them again and come down again. And when then when it's reestablished, the tabernacle gets built out of the same kind of junk jewelry that was put into the golden calf, right? So it seems to me it's not like this thing and that. It's that the way it flows together is the tabernacle is so God will have a place amongst the people. And because, as you say, the people need to have God in their presence. So you think of him first up in that cloud with the lightning and terrifying everybody. And then eventually it comes down into a place that the people have built with the same junk that they built this wrong thing with. And in a sense, they own the home that God is going to have on amongst them. To me, the progression is the story.
Beautiful. Thank you. Miriam. And then Penina. There you go.
Okay. This year, I read the first sentence of Terumah, a Parshat that we read a few weeks ago. And I pondered it entirely differently. And I said to myself, in 9 decades, how is it I never saw this before? How is it never bothered me before? It bothers me in an interesting way. And I'll just read it quickly. Speak to the children of Israel and let them take from me a portion from every man whose heart motivates him. You shall take my portion. And I always skipped over that. And we talked about the portions and we talked about how much and how to make things rather egalitarian, etc. And then in Vayakhel, again, we will read tomorrow the same kind of thing, whosever heart motivates him. So I am thinking, what a profound psychological thing to say, thinking for thousands and thousands of years ago. In other words, does that mean that people give whether their heart motivates them or not? Does that mean that we are giving you an out? We are telling you, Israel, if you don't want to give, you don't have to give. So we can't say this, for example, to Hadassah women. There would be no Hadassah hospital in Jerusalem. The largest and the best in the whole Middle East, or maybe one of the best in the world. And so we have to tell people that they have to give, and we're not interested in whether their heart is motivating them so much. Because at the end of the year, we're giving to a lot of organizations that maybe we're not involved in, we're not deeply part of, and it doesn't matter because they need the few dollars that we can give. So far, so many thousands of years ago, we see the Torah in such a profound emotional, psychological dilemma, even at that time. And that kind of blows my mind. And I want to share that with all of you. I'm not looking for an answer, Rabbi. I'm not looking for a solution. I never do in the Torah. That's part of the excitement of it. We don't always have an answer.
Yes.
Thanks.
And I don't have an answer, but I will say what's interesting is that there are other commandments about tzedakah in the Torah that are different from this, that seem to go to what you're saying, which is there are certain obligations to give regardless. And this is slightly different from those other mitzvot and commandments that we find in the Torah that do obligate us to give no matter what, right? And here, the tabernacle is seen as is in a different category because you're right, people have the out. They don't necessarily, if their hearts don't move them, they don't need to give to the building of the tabernacle.
That's what it's saying. It's
right?
saying.
So the tabernacle is only.
Yes, excuse me. It says it in Truma and in Vayakhel more than once, more than one time. It says it, and
which makes the tabernacle extra special because only people whose hearts were so moved to actually give were the ones who helped to build that tabernacle. And other times, everyone has to give, right? But the tabernacle seems to be differentiated from that. So thank you, Miriam. Penina and then Susan.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, I'm going to try to bring it to our days. You're giving donations. You're not giving donations. You're giving dues to the temple to do all the renovations and to keep up the rabbis alive and well. So they did the same thing at those days. The Kohanim were supposed to be getting, when the sacrifices were being given, they used to give twice because the Kohanim they would get the ones from the people. So they would be the ones who support the temple. They didn't do anything else. They took care of it, but they needed to live too. So we know from the korbanot, from the sacrifices, that there was always a portion of it that was given for the Kohanim. So that's one. Second, you are very right about organizations. Yes. And also they had a way of taxing, which we never talked about it, that the year is divided into different sections. And then there was a month that they gave taxes, and that was in, I think, Tishrei, or before, until the last of the month. They used to give seven cows, 7 bulls, and so much according to wherever the people were dealing with. So there was even a system that the people paid that, and like we're paying tax today, to maintain the government and to maintain all whatever it is that the government is supporting. So they weren't that far away from that. And I think we haven't learned from that this is a way to do things. And we carry it till today. That's it.
Thank you.
We keep the temples, we keep the rabbis, God bless them, and that's it.
Got to keep me alive.
Yeah.
Susan and then Merle.
Is somebody before me?
You had,
Yes, Susan.
you had actually answered what I was thinking with that. I think that, Miriam, thank you. You brought up a very interesting point about giving from my heart, but I remember reading it. It's not an adage, but an admonition, but you see a beggar, a poor man on the street, the person who says, I really feel for you. I'm sorry for your condition. Here is $1. And then there's and he does it out of sympathy. And then there's the person who it doesn't say anything particularly and gives them $300. Now, which would the poor person prefer in terms of, now those are two extremes because you could do both, there's nothing stopping you from the sympathy, but who's helping the poor person more, the one that gives $1 and says, oh, it's so bad, or the one that actually gives more money? And then Miriam's point too, and you had said it, you can't rely only on your feelings, there are mitzvot for things, and you can't do too much either of that, these admonitions, without some kind of feeling going with it. And this was a temple structure that it's interesting. I like the play of the gold that they used before to be used again, and interestingly, the gold came from the Egyptians, as well as going back to that lineage. Then I had something about our first reading of the minutiae of what you're not supposed to do for things that don't even apply today. But they're getting so involved in the minutiae of threading and putting the needle in and taking the needle out. Why? Isn't that a snore, that you start reading all of that and then think, okay, you lost the big picture here.
Well, because I'm just to answer that briefly before Merle speaks, we are all about the details. I mean, again, this whole section of the Torah, where we're talking about all the details of the building of the tabernacle, could have skipped straight through that, and the Torah could have just said, and God commanded, bring gifts and build a tabernacle, and the Jews built a tabernacle, right? But we go into all the nitty-gritty details, which also could, for some, especially B'nai Mitzvah students, can feel like a snore for sure, because they're like, how am I supposed to connect this to my life? But I think the details, right, it's a reminder that for us, the details matter. If you're going to live an intentional life, which of course mitzvot and the law structure of Judaism is supposed to give us a structure to live a meaningful life. A meaningful life is lived in those details, right? It's the details of how you interact with people, how you treat the world around you, and being intentional, and as even Heschel talks about, radical amazement, right? Not only the way in which we receive the world, to give to the world, but how do we actually receive the things that we see around us, and to be amazed on a constant basis with the details, right? I think he references seeing a rock or a leaf on the ground, right? How can we pay attention to those details? Okay, Merle, and then I want to get to one more thing before we wrap up today.
I just, I'm thinking about gifts, donations from the heart. And I think about, what Penina said, keeping you guys all alive, your families. But I also think about, and what Susan just said about that $1 or whatever we give to the person on the street. And when you look at the list of donations and you think about, where am I making this donation? What's going to make the person who's receiving it feel good? But also, when Karsh Center sends out an email, or Women of Wilshire, or somebody sends out an email saying Karsh Center needs diapers or baby clothes or whatever, I don't think I even think about it, because I know that it's going to make someone happy, comfortable, healthy, whatever. And you just make the donation, or you go to Amazon or whoever, Target, whatever they give you the link to, and send it. And I think here in our temple here, when they ask for donations and they say, and it says on the form, wherever you, meaning the congregation or the whoever's in charge of the donations, need it the most this week. And I'm thinking about that can help the people. It also I think in this case, I think God wanted us all to create something that we were all a part of, whether it's someone else's life, whether it's the community, whether, I don't think so much that it, the Mishkan happened to be needed at the time, but I think it's wherever we are. If we're out in the desert somewhere and we're all together helping one another in one way or another, that to me is what the gifts are. I think that, yeah, it's from the heart. We don't necessarily, well, some people think about it before they make that donation, but I think I just do it rote because I know it has to be done.
We're lucky to have you, Merle, for sure. Okay, I want to one last thing before we end.
Okay.
There's a lot more. Again, we didn't get to all of it, and I'll make sure to put the link to this page if you want to study some of this afterwards and over Shabbat. Just want to point out Bezalel and Oholiav. So, and Moses said to the Israelites, "See, Adonai has singled out by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, endowing him with a divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge in every kind of craft, and inspiring him to make designs for work in gold, silver, and copper, to cut stones for setting and to carve wood, to work in every kind of designer's craft, and to give directions. He and Oholiav, son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan, have been endowed with the skill to do any work of the carver, of the designer, the embroiderer in blue, purple, crimson yarns, and fine linen, of the weaver, as workers in all crafts and as makers of design." I only want to bring that, again, we're about to be out of time, but just the importance of creativity in the arts that are built into the Torah, that just as we have, in our morning services, we have Psalm 150, which is the last of the 150 Psalms, which really just talks about the role of music and musical instruments, and it basically lists off musical instruments and the importance of music and how there was music at the temple, right, in Jerusalem a long time ago, but also here in the Torah, the importance, the spiritual depth and creativity and necessity of the arts in order to bring God into the world, that our tradition puts that so much at the forefront of what is a key piece of society, and for us to be reminded of that, and that this is a really key part of that, right? There's the Bezalel Institute in Israel that was founded a long time ago for artists, right? And based on Bezalel, who created the tabernacle, and there are other people who play a role in building. They're not the only ones who actually build the tabernacle. Everyone whose skills, it talks about people with different skills came and brought their skills to build the tabernacle, and there are many levels of how we can understand skills. But I just wanted to make sure that we are reminded that creativity in the arts are really throughout history, when we've been kicked out of places, we haven't been able to hold on to the art that's been created, the physical art, and really that transformed into the prayer book, right? Liturgy became a way in which we were able to hold on to artistic creativity, because you could take words and thoughts with you in a way that you couldn't when you were escaping pogroms and all the people trying to kill us. You couldn't escape with your statues and your art necessarily. But here is just a key, clear reminder of the value we need to place on the arts. So with that, I want to officially close, and then I know there are a couple of people we can stick around for a little bit and still talk if you want to. But
Okay.
I just want to say Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Thank you for joining me and for all of your insights as always. And hopefully we'll get to see each other. Some of us, Merle, you're a lot further. Mom, you're a lot further than here in LA. But for those who are in LA, now that our doors are open for Shabbat services, hopefully we'll get to see you at one of those in the near future. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Rabbi, can I ask you for prayer? May I ask you
I'll
for
watch
prayer?
you on Facebook.
Who'll
Yes.
watch you?
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos. Bye-bye.
Good Shabbos. I wanted to ask Rabbi a question.
Yes.
Would you pray for me? Because starting in March, I go to auditions for music and playing piano and singing, so I can be in a position to really give one day. I would appreciate your prayers. And it's all run by Jewish people. Adrian Baranski, cousin of Steven Spielberg. So please pray so that I can make a difference. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes, best of
Thank
luck to you, Donna. All right, Shabbat
Bye
Shalom,
bye.
everyone.
Shalom.
Shabbat
Bye.
shalom.
Shalom.
Whoever wants to stay, I wouldn't mind pursuing some of our talking.
Okay.
Okay, Panina? You're muted.